It's the end of NATO. There is no question in my mind that that is the end of NATO as a functional security alliance. But as I said, to what end? It's also the end of any pretense that the rationale for security policy that is being announced by the White House is real. I mean, against who? Against what security threat would we be annexing Greenland? Certainly not Russia, which has been cited, because Russia's already in the White House.
Today we are going to try to understand current Trump's geopolitical purposes and trajectory of Putin towards USA and Ukraine more clearly. My guest is Sarah Chayes, who served as a special advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sarah, thank you for being here.
It's an honor.
Yeah. We are observing that so-called peace process lags. Which scenarios do you see in current period of time, and what is the US military political establishment set up for?
That's a hard one to answer for I would say three reasons. One is that President Trump makes unpredictability. Basically, he instrumentalizes his unpredictability. It's one of his most important strategic assets, is not being someone who's easily prepared for, number one. Number two, it is my belief, I don't have detailed evidence supporting it, except what everyone knows, that President Trump is deeply entwined with President Putin. I think everything from the variety and density of contacts between members of Trump's circle and Moscow over the years, the body language going all the way back to the Helsinki summit in his first term in office, when you watch the two men walking out on stage and the body language of President Trump was to me, a whipped dog. The fact that President Trump has frequently, we don't know how many times it's happened in this administration, but his first time around was frequently in private communication with President Putin without any interpreters or any US personnel even being present. And then you look at the consistency of his actions on everything from Ukraine to Greenland to NATO to insulting America's Western European allies in the National Defense Strategy that was recently published. All of it corresponds almost exactly to Putin's design, which has been quite public, even in documents going back to the 1990s. And so that's the second aspect. And the third aspect is that too many Americans, including members of the military establishment, are not really willing to acknowledge the facts that I just laid out for you. Nor, for example, the UK. I remember not a recent interview with the former chief of defense, UK chief of defense, who's someone that I know from Afghanistan. And he just, again, was sort of analyzing Trump's actions as though he were an ordinary president, kind of ignoring the evidence that there is of a very close affiliation between President Trump's actions in foreign and strategic policy, foreign and security policy, and the desires and wishes and tactics of President Putin. And so if you have a military establishment, part of which owes fealty to President Trump, is personally, I want to say, beholden to him, and owes personal fealty to him, and the rest of which, the more professional uniform military, which is kind of pretending that it's business as usual in Washington, you end up with a very difficult to read perspective for US policy.
Mm-hmm. From a strategic perspective, what does Moscow's resilience say about Russia's military and industrial capacity, and how should Western allies recalibrate, determined and support to avoid protracted stalemate?
I'm not sure about stalemate. Here's the scenario I think Europe should be operating, with this. I think Europe should be operating with the following scenario in mind. You have, for all intents and purposes, two authoritarian powers flanking Western Europe. You have which are allied. You have effectively an authoritarian Russia increasingly allied with an increasingly authoritarian United States moving in on Europe. Russia kind of creeping in on Ukraine with pretty much the blessing of at least the US administration, and the US administration creeping in on Western Europe from the West. So you have a pincer situation. And I think any fantasy that the United States is still an effective part of the NATO alliance is self-delusion on Europe's part. And Europe ought to be moving very swiftly to develop an integrated autonomous defense.
Yeah, in terms of security guarantees for Ukraine, what would constitute credible and durable assurance from the West? And how could those guarantees be structured to survive political cycles in the US?
They need to be structured without the United States. Don't count on the United States to provide security guarantees for Ukraine. It's not going to happen.
I got you. What are the misperceptions among US publics about the Russia-Ukraine war? Do you have any?
The main misperception, and again, I'm speaking, this is a very big country with a very large and diverse population. And so I'm not in a good position to speak for the entire United States, but I think the United States is a little bit asleep, doesn't really understand the significance of Ukraine. I think we are in a period of such serious democratic backsliding in this country that the notion that Ukraine is a potential democratic bulwark to the east of Europe, I just don't think the mass, I just don't think most of the American population is tuned into that. I think most American population is worried about the deployment of federal troops in our own cities, or is worried about the price of eggs in the supermarket.
Okay. How could you indicate current Trump's position towards Iran? What scenarios are the most plausible, in your opinion?
I think that President Trump has no visceral attachment to government by and for the people. So any pretense that he might get engaged with Iran on behalf of the Iranian people, any pretense that he actually cares that there is a crackdown on public demonstrators is, again, a kind of fantasy. I mean, he is cracking down on public demonstrators in the city of Minneapolis as we speak. So in a weird way, he is behaving not as egregiously, but he's behaving in similar ways to the Iranian leadership. I think the current demonstrations in Iran are being used as a pretext by Trump for something else that he might want out of Iran. And that could have anything to do with, that could have to do with anything from the nuclear program to an interaction with Israel. I think a very important element of all of this to understand, two really important elements. Number one is kleptocracy. Kleptocracy is government on behalf of a networked group of elites whose primary interest is self-enrichment and who will bend and distort the instruments of state power and of foreign and security policy in order to further their goal of self-enrichment at the expense of their own population if necessary. And that principle is actually spread throughout the world currently in a way that hasn't been seen since the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And I think that that principle is very relevant to Ukraine's stories going all the way back to 2014 and before. I mean, the revolution that overthrew Yanukovych, I think, again, you know better than I do, but in my view, it wasn't only about whether Ukraine wants to gravitate more toward the West rather than toward Moscow, but also was a revolution against the extractive, kleptocratic nature of the Yanukovych government. And so if you look at President Trump's behavior, don't underestimate the value of just simply amassing uncounted wealth. It's a race for infinite wealth. And so Iran may be part of that. I think Venezuela is part of that. I think Greenland is part of that. I mean, rare earth, he doesn't give a damn about American national security. I mean, security against whom? It's also about infinite wealth. It's about also, I think, possession. So let me just come back again to the Greenland story. And there was an interview, a long interview between President Trump and 3 reporters from the New York Times, and snippets of it have been made public. And there was a very interesting exchange around Greenland, where the reporter asked about whether it was so important to actually own Greenland. And President Trump said, yes, ownership is very important. And the reporter said, wait, important for whom? For you? And he said, yes, psychologically important to me. Mm-hmm. So let's not underestimate, let's not fall into the trap, again, as I suggested before, of reading Trump like an ordinary president who has public-spirited ideas of security and foreign policy and strategy, and think of him more as a very intuitive operator who is motivated by an insatiable appetite for ownership and infinite wealth. Those are principles that unfortunately are guiding US policy at the moment.
Recent geopolitical events have revealed that Russian allies around the world can't count on Putin in the most difficult moment. Assad, Maduro, and now Khamenei. How this affects trust, relations, and potential cooperation and inside the so-called axis of evil?
I honestly don't know. You know, you're asking me to try to put myself into the psychology of countries that I don't have a lot of experience with. But let's just say, what other options do they have? You know, I mean, Maduro, nobody else was, you know, so what they need to do is like everyone else, don't really trust you. I mean, this is what's so interesting. We're moving from a trust-based international order into an international order that's quite chaotic. And so I just think anyone who puts their trust in an individual like Putin or like Trump needs their head examining, you know? And I'm not really sure that, again, I want to say that if these leaders of these countries actually trusted Putin, then, you know, then they're reaping what they sowed.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring just one other issue into this because I suspect that your questions may not touch on it. There are significant implications to a world governed by these types of practices beyond our species. Now, I know we humans are very self-involved and we really think we're the only species that matters on the planet. But these practices and policies are having devastating impacts on the biosphere of which we're just only a part. And I think, Ukraine, you have been experiencing massive devastation of, your landscapes, the whole environment, which people of our generation hope to pass along to our children and grandchildren, and also to all the other species with whom we share this planet. But I just think it's very important to recognize these impacts that tend to get overlooked in the immediate urgency for humans of dangerous situations.
Sarah, you have already shared with us your view, your opinion about Greenland and about Trump's perception towards Greenland. But I would like to ask you about consequences, about implications for for global security. I mean, for instance, let's imagine that Trump annexes Greenland or forces Denmark to sell the island to USA. What would it mean for global security architecture, and how autocracies around the world perceive this precedent?
I think the answer is inherent in the framing of your question. It's the end of NATO. There is no question in my mind that that is the end of NATO as a functional security alliance. But as I said, to what end? It's also the end of any pretense that the rationale for security policy that is being announced by the White House is real. I mean, against who? Against what security threat would we be annexing Greenland? Certainly not Russia, which has been cited, because Russia's already in the White House. So we're not protecting ourselves against Russia. China is not really present in Greenland. China is present in the waters around Alaska. So it has nothing to do with U.S. national security. It effectively ends NATO as a viable defense alliance. And let me go back. It means the wholesale exploitation of mineral resources in one of the most fragile ecosystems left on the planet. And oh, by the way, Venezuela is part of the Amazon basin. So the Arctic and the Amazon are two of the most precious, just in terms of the health of the planet, biospheres that exist. And they would be mauled for the purposes of creating yet more infinite wealth. And so when you talk about the security architecture and the security implications of annexing Greenland, let's think beyond 20th century notions of what security is all about. We're talking about really dramatically accelerated negative impacts on an increasingly fragile planet is part of the security implications of annexing Greenland.
According to official statement of U.S. Department of State, the Western Hemisphere is a sphere of U.S. interest. Does it mean that in Trump's administration perception, world has to be divided into different spheres of influence, like after the Second World War?
I think that's what it looks like. Yeah. Bearing in mind that if that's the case, then the near abroad is ceded to Moscow. But bear in mind that there is, in my view, a degree of connivance between Trump's Washington and Putin's Moscow, So these are not rival spheres of influence. It's almost like mafia families who have divided up the city, and they are in good relationship with each other. Will they slap each other's fingers if they, stray a little bit too far? Maybe. But fundamentally, they are in alliance. The question, where this notion breaks down is Trump also obviously feels that the Middle East is part of the American sphere of influence, and that's not in our hemisphere. So how do you account for that? It's like my hemisphere plus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. In your opinion, what is the most important for Trump right now in terms of domestic policy and foreign affairs? I mean, where is his real focus on in view of the midterm elections?
I think the idea that the United States is going to have an ordinary, free and fair election, so long as President Trump is in power, is not a great bet. I think the degree to which President Trump is thinking about midterm and certainly presidential elections has more to do with how he can guarantee his own hold on power and less about how he can win the genuine support of the American voters by protecting and guarding their interests. I don't think that's how Trump works. I think Trump is enough of an authoritarian, and he's been very explicit about that, to, I just don't, there isn't a lot of evidence that authoritarians cede power voluntarily. I don't think President Trump is going to give up power voluntarily.
Yeah, actually, you have mentioned Europe, but I would like to ask my last question. Do you believe that the EU is capable of achieving leading role in peace establishment in Europe? Because, as we know, German Chancellor said that Berlin is ready to become such a leader. What steps of EU make you be sure about it, and what ones make you have a doubt?
I'm doubtful that European leaders are fully cognizant of the dimensions of the shifts in policy. I think they are still clinging to an older vision of a basically transatlantic security structure. I think they have to stop wasting their time trying to flatter and induce Trump's Washington to sort of stay on board. I think we, the United States, has become an entirely unreliable ally for the European Union. And the faster they can regain a sense of purpose and leadership for themselves as an autonomous, federated or confederated body of nations, the better. And I don't see enough indications that they are understanding that. It's kind of reminding me almost of the situation, I don't know when it was, I think the 13th century, when the Mongols were sweeping across Central Asia and up against the edges of the European continent, which was divided into all of these fiefdoms. And the only thing that saved Europe from the Mongols was the death of Genghis Khan, which caused all of their armies to go back and elect a new leader. And that was a lucky event for Western Europe. I mean, I think human history, or at least Western history, would have looked very different if that hadn't happened. And I don't think you can count on accidents like that. And so I would love to see leadership of greater stature, of greater courage, of greater moral clarity arising within Europe. And at the moment, I haven't seen it. France is not in, none of the leading European countries, Germany, the UK or France, or anyone else is really quite there yet. And you are seeing at least a little bit of a more robust response to the encroachment on Greenland. I'd like to see it quite a bit stronger. I guess what I would leave you with is that from my experience, which is not in the geographic zone that we've been discussing, my most lived experience of foreign and security affairs was in Afghanistan. And I lived on the ground speaking Pashto in Afghanistan for a decade. And what I saw there was that bullies and strongmen and would-be authoritarians do not respond to flattery and concessions. It just makes them want more. The only way to deal with people of the stripe of Putin and Trump is to stand up to them. But to do that, you have to be united, you have to be fearless, you have to be a bit of a bully yourself. And that is the kind of lesson that I would like to see Western Europe take.
Yeah, I understand what you are talking about. It's true. Sarah, thank you very much for this discussion. Thank you very much for your expertise. I appreciate it. Keep in touch and have a good day.
You do the same. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm honored and a little bit humbled because we were outside of my comfort zone.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.